The colonel's laughter died in his throat the moment those three words left the old man's lips. Delta Force, actual. The room went so quiet you could hear the air conditioning hum, and suddenly everyone understood that this weathered stranger in the corner wasn't just any veteran. He was a ghost from a world most soldiers only whispered about. It started as an ordinary Tuesday morning at the Marine Corps recruiting office in Quantico. Colonel James Mitchell had just finished briefing a group of fresh-faced recruits about honor, discipline, and what it truly meant to serve. He was in high spirits, riding the wave of his own eloquence when an old man shuffled through the door. The guy looked like he'd stepped out of a time capsule, maybe 70 years old, wearing a faded Vietnam airfield jacket with no patches, no rank, nothing. His face was weathered like old leather, deep lines, carved by sun and wind and things most people never see. Mitchell barely glanced at him before returning to his conversation with the staff sergeant, something about weekend training exercises and paper. But one of the young recruits, a kid named Thompson who hadn't yet learned when to keep his mouth shut, walked up to the old man with that cocky swagger only the truly inexperienced possess. "Hey, Pops," Thompson said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You looking for the VFW hall? It's 3 blocks down." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room. The old man didn't react, just stood there with his hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the walls covered with Marine Corps history and propaganda posters. Mitchell, feeling generous and wanting to teach the recruits a lesson about respect, decided to intervene with what he thought was humor. He walked over, extended his hand, and with a theatrical grin asked, "Don't mind the kid, sir. Thank you for your service. What was your rank, if you don't mind me asking?" He expected to hear private, maybe sergeant if the guy had a decent career, something to prompt a respectful nod and a handshake before sending him on his way. But what happened next would replay in Mitchell's mind for years to come. The old man's eyes, which had seemed distant and clouded, suddenly sharpened with a clarity that was almost frightening. He didn't shake Mitchell's hand. Instead, he stood a little straighter, and though his body was old, something in his posture shifted, transformed. "Delta Force Actual," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of 1,000 operations no one would ever read about in history books. The effect was instantaneous. Mitchell's hand dropped. The staff sergeant behind the desk actually stood. Even Thompson, who didn't fully understand what he'd just heard, sensed the seismic shift in the room's atmosphere. Delta Force Actual wasn't. It was a call sign reserved for the commanding officer of operational detachments in the most elite special operations unit in the United States military. This man, this unassuming stranger they'd almost dismissed as a confused old-timer, had once commanded teams that inserted into hostile territories where failure meant death and success meant silence. He'd operated in shadows so deep that even other special operators only heard rumors. Mitchell's face went pale, not from fear, but from the sudden crushing realization of his own insignificance. Everything he'd accomplished, every medal on his chest, every commendation and promotion suddenly felt like kindergarten achievements compared to what this man had done. "Sir," Mitchell started, but the old man raised a hand gently. "It's all right, Colonel," he said, and there was no anger in his voice, no need to prove anything. "I'm just here to talk to young men about service, the real kind. The kind where you don't get parades." He glanced at Thompson, whose face had gone from cocky to crimson.
"The kind where you come home and nobody knows what you did and you carry it alone." The silence stretched heavy with meaning. The old man moved to one of the chairs against the wall and sat down slowly, his joints protesting. Mitchell followed, unable to do anything else, drawn by a gravity he couldn't name. The recruits gathered closer, sensing they were about to hear something that wouldn't be in any manual. "I lost good men," the old man continued, staring at something far beyond the walls of that office. "Men whose names you'll never know. Men who died in countries we weren't supposed to be in during wars that were never declared. I held a 23-year-old kid in my arms while he bled out in the jungle, and he asked me to tell his mother he loved her, but I couldn't, because officially we were never there. He never died, he just disappeared from the record." His voice cracked just slightly, revealing the fracture lines in a soul that had carried too much for too long. So when you put on that uniform, he looked directly at Thompson now, his gaze penetrating. Understand what you're really signing up for. It's not about being tough. It's not about glory. It's about being willing to become a ghost for people who never thank you. Mitchell sat there, a full-bird colonel with 20 years of service, feeling like a child in the presence of something ancient and profound. He wanted to say something meaningful, something worthy of the moment, but words felt inadequate. Finally he managed, "What brings you here today, sir?" The old man smiled, a sad, knowing smile that had seen too many sunrises in hostile deserts and too many brothers laid to rest in unmarked graves. "I'm dying," he said simply. "Cancer, 6 months, maybe less. I wanted to make sure at least one group of young warriors understood that the uniform doesn't make you special. Your willingness to sacrifice everything, including being forgotten, that's what makes you special." He stood up slowly, and this time every person in that room stood with him, not because protocol demanded it, but because something primal and deeply human insisted. "Carry each other," he said as he moved toward the door. "That's the only thing that matters." Mitchell followed him outside, and in the harsh Virginia sunlight he watched the old man climb into a beat-up pickup truck and drive away. He never got his name, he never saw him again. But that night, Michel took off his uniform and sat in his study staring at his medals and commendations, and for the first time in his career, he understood the difference between serving for glory and serving in silence. He understood that true warriors don't need recognition because the weight of what they carry is heavier than any medal could ever be. Somewhere out there, an old ghost was driving home, carrying shadows that would follow him to his grave, never asking for thanks, never expecting recognition. Just another forgotten warrior who'd given everything for a country that would never know his name. And somehow in that anonymity there was a purity of service that made every parade, every ceremony, every public honor seem hollow by comparison. That's what it meant to be Delta Force Actual. Not a rank, not a position, but a burden carried in silence at the very end.